I got a question. Is Chicago the most corrupt city in the United States of America? Shout out to that super chat. I'm going to be reading that shortly. Jacquel, I appreciate you. Content is king. I appreciate you. Is Chicago the most corrupt city in America? Jay Reed says, well, I'll read that. Jay Reed, bring that back up. I'm going to read it in a minute because I don't want to get distracted from this. Yeah, why y'all in y'all feelings about Chicago? Why are people so butthurt about Chicago? I just asked the question. I haven't even watched the video that I'm going to present to you guys yet. Mayor Mohawk back on the deck. I wasn't even going to talk about Mayor Mohawk. Osriel, that is a great Mayor Mohawk back on deck. Y'all said New York is competing with Hollywood, New Orleans, Louisiana. Listen, I'll show y'all just how objective I am before I start to go in on and present this video. I believe that in the late 70s and the 80s and even early 90s, Detroit was possibly the most corrupt city in the United States of America. I believe, and I know that everybody loved Mayor Coleman Young over here in Detroit because he was a blackety black and he stood up for the people. But let me help you to understand something. If you know, you know. I believe that Mayor Coleman Young, God rest his soul, and I would never say anything negative or go into details about him simply because he's not here to be able to defend himself, which is one of the reasons why I feel so comfortable talking to Mayor Johnson. Mayor Johnson, all you got to do is kick it with me and do an interview, and then we going to put you out the pasture as far as not really having no conversation because you'll be able to give your own perspective on this, right? I believe that Mayor Coleman Young leveraged the city and used it as his own personal piggy bank and ran it like a mafia leader back in the 80s and 90s. Honest to God. It's one of the reasons why I think that Detroit ended up the way that it did, and we had to recover from everything that happened in order to get to the spaces that we are now. I digress. Chicago today in 2023, 2024. Is Chicago the most corrupt city in the United States of America? I seen this video pop up, and so I said that I was going to play it for you guys, at least play a portion of it, and see what they had to say. Make sure y'all hit a like for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. I love you guys.
Chicago has never left the feudal age, okay? The facade looks terrific. That money goes directly to Abu Dhabi. $2 to $3 billion, that's poof, gone. When there's no base rules, then strong leaders develop. What Chicago has, and it's nowhere else in America, it's called...
The money's coming in every year there, but going out of the city to Canada,
and
funding
again,
their employees' retirement.
That bill is coming due. What do you call it when two politicians get together for a meeting in Chicago, Peter?
So you could honestly see, hey, we have these beautiful beaches.
Right. Yeah, is Mexico going to own them next summer? Don't make those people hide. Don't make them become more extreme. Don't make them become more violent. It's tied to the very bloodline of how the city has worked since the 1830s when it was founded.
Good morning, guys. Here in Chicago, referred to as the most corrupt or one of the most corrupt cities in America. We're meeting up with a First Amendment attorney who knows the city inside and out, grew up here, and is going to show us on the ground examples of corruption taking place here in Chicago. Let's do this.
I'm curious as to what it is that he has to say. Foregoing all of the music, let's see if I can fast forward it a little bit. I don't want to see all of the scenery. I don't need to see that.
If you see that dome building that we're looking at, that's the Adler Planetarium. And as you move inland, at some point here, it becomes what used to be Meigs Field. It was the third airport in Chicago. It's no longer.
The airport was right there.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, wow.
You can see the stretch of land over to the right between the buildings. It's now northerly island.
Got a dope view.
It's all tied to how Chicago operates. how do we know Chicago's corrupt? And it gets kind of squishy looking at the different numbers. One way that we know is looking at just some anecdotal evidence. 35 billion with a B in debt. Four very large, oh, you're
No
fine,
problem.
man. Four large pension funds that go for things like the police and firefighters and such. They have $10 billion in assets to cover that 35 billion in debt. If we look at crime is up 20.
Chicago, y'all $35 billion in debt? Seriously? Is Chicago $35 billion? Chicago debt. Chicago has just $10.6 billion in assets, according to illinoispolicy.org, totaling, to pay its bills, which total $48 billion, $35 billion roughly in debt. Chicago's total bills was the second highest in the nation, better than only New York, which had over $251 billion in bills. Wow. It said each taxpayer is on the hook for nearly $42,000 in debt in Illinois. Oh, I'm sorry, in Chicago. That's not even Illinois. That's just Chicago. Each Chicago taxpayer with 9.5 billion people is on the hook for about $42,000 if they spread that out amongst each person. $42,000 per person in debt and growing. And growing. Wow. I did not know that. I'm learning more and more about Chicago every day. Hey, who's going to hold me accountable this Friday about how bad Chicago is?
30% over the past 5 years.
What kind of crime?
Theft and burglary, robberies, these sorts of things. Murders are slightly trending downwards. That's happening nationally.
You wouldn't know that by looking at the news. You'd think murders would be up, right?
Well, it's sensational, but data says they're slightly down. But we should be concerned about property crime and the like, and especially with Illinois in September, it'll be switching to cashless bail.
Yep, the Safety Act. So they've traded in killing people over in Chicago for crimes against property that said we want to go ahead and get our bans up. So the cashless bail system has now incentivized you to continue to commit crime in Illinois, because now you have a cashless bail system where they basically give you a slap on the wrist and said, hey, we want you to appear in court. Make sure you come back. It don't matter how bad the crime is that you did.
Right. So those who've been convicted of crime will no longer be held unless it can be shown that they're an extreme, risk for flight.
Okay.
So there's a concern about recidivism there and about repeat crime. But we have a school system in Chicago that is spending 55% more now on 20% less students. It has been a sort of a grand failure nationally.
So there goes the myth of throwing more money at a problem instead of actually fixing the core root of why children are failing in the first place. So you're spending 55% more money, 55% more money in the budget allocated towards Chicago schools, which is one of the reasons why y'all property taxes are so high. And you have 20% less children. Where is the money going? Where is the money going?
20% proficient in English language arts of the students in Chicago. 16% proficient in math.
16 for the whole city.
16. That's the average.
Crazy.
Okay.
So spending 50% more, 20% less students, delivering 20% and 16%.
But how can you blame that on corruption? Isn't that a whole host of factors?
It is a host of factors, but if we take these together and we think about what does corruption do to a city and what does it do to a people? It removes resources that you would otherwise use in a well-functioning state to be able to deliver services. It's the slowest growing city for 2 decades. From 20 to 2022, it lost 80,000 people. In the year of 2022, it lost another 100,000 people. They're fleeing the city.
Where are they going?
Largely going to places like Florida and Texas.
So, Chicagoans, basically what he explained to you guys, and this video is a fairly long video, so I'm not going to play all of it, but basically what he's explaining to you guys is corruption is not only based off of who's making money and who's siphoning money. And it's not basically based off of optics. It's also based off of how you allocate the resources in the city to divert it against the things that help the city grow and what's in the best interest of the residents for your own purposes, for whatever that reason is. We don't know what the reason is. We can't read people's minds. We can't assume. All we can do is look at where the money is going. And so if you're spending 55% more money for 20% less students and getting exponentially worse results as a result of it, right, then that is the very definition of one of the definitions of corruption, right? He's breaking it down for you. He's saying that, listen, 80,000 people left in this particular segment. It is the slowest growing city in the United States of America, the slowest growing large city. 100,000 people left in this particular segment alone. And where did they go? Y'all all ran to Texas and Florida and Atlanta and Nashville and all of these places, and you probably took your voting habits with you.
Those seem to be two main drivers.
So they're leaving the state.
They're leaving the state.
Because in California, a lot of leaving Los Angeles and San Francisco, a lot are staying within California.
Right. No, they're not staying in Illinois. More broadly speaking, beyond Chicago, Illinois has the highest property taxes. Illinois itself is rated as one of the most corrupt states, usually in the top 5. So if you're looking to leave Chicago, it's not enough just to head.
So if you're looking to leave Chicago, you can't just leave Chicago, the city. You got to leave the whole state, is what he's saying. The property taxes in Chicago and Illinois specifically are some of the highest in the country. I'm telling you, man, I realized this years ago when I was coaching somebody that was the manager of a major artist, and he was telling me what his property taxes was. And I said, oh my God, that can't be it. That can't be it. Y'all can't be paying them type of property taxes over there in Chicago, especially for the services that y'all getting.
An hour or two out, you want to go somewhere for a fresh, clean start.
So what I'm gathering, Ben, is you like corruption. That's why you live here. You enjoy the tough love.
I am north of Chicago, so I'm close enough to be able to come in and do my work.
But you're in Illinois.
I am in Illinois. I am. I've got family here, and want to take care of them. But and it's it's the land of Lincoln. There's a lot that's good in the state of Illinois. I love Midwestern people. I've lived on the East Coast for a good amount of time. It's a very cold, sort of soulless place. I love the heart in Chicago. I love the small talk. I love the banter. I love the people. But you're dealing with a city that has 50 aldermen. So think of it as 50 mayors with their own feudal little states. What Chicago has, and it's nowhere else in America, it's called aldermanic privilege.
And this is funny because I've never heard of this until I started deep diving into Chicago politics. You guys have a city, and then you have what you call aldermen. Now, what I thought that cities were supposed to have was city council members that then represent different segments of the city and speak on behalf of what's in the best interest of the residents. You guys have 50. I thought that regular cities had like 5, 8, 10 city council members that then decide what happens or where the resources is going to be allocated over to. You guys have 50 aldermen, and I've never heard of an alderman until I started deep diving into Chicago politics. But basically, you guys are like, if Brandon Johnson is Biden, all of the aldermen is Chicago, is Illinois, Michigan, California, Texas, not Nashville, Tennessee, Florida, New York. You guys have little cities that you can then take over that then determine what happened, and you're supposed to speak on the behalf of what's supposed to be happening in the city as a whole. That cannot be any more of a dumb situation why don't we reduce the aldermen now that we have a lower population that doesn't, whatever. Let me see a little bit more of this video.
Okay. So if you are this store here, Planta Queen, and you want to add on an addition here that would generally be allowable and is a simple zoning variance, your alderman has to sign off on it, and he can say no for no basis in the law and reject it, and so your business streams can be shut down. They have considerable authority without any reference to statutory provisions, regulations to control exactly what's happening here. Now, if you're someone who cares about things like racial equity and some of the issues that we've seen discussed by good folks on the left more recently, Chicago's still a very segregated city, with minorities frequently being on the south side of Chicago and the north and northwest side of Chicago being predominantly white. On the north and northwest side, about a 90% blockage of low-income, multi-unit, affordable housing. So if you want to keep minorities out of an area, you give aldermen that sort of power. They've been routinely criticized for this. They promise reform, they promise better things. At the same time, you see about a 90% approval on the south side of Chicago when these sort of projects come up. So there's this sort of subtle form, maybe of racism, that's built into that, because aldermen are given this tremendous power, and rather than have specifically defined duties and rules and roles or professional managers in the city, we've still kept that power. Now, we used to do this. New York used to do this. Boston used to do this. But there were reforms that occurred in the late 1800s and early 1900s towards a more professional way of managing cities. Chicago has never left the feudal age, okay?
So what he's basically saying is that if you get into power, it's similar to being a union leader. You then have the power to determine what happens within your local, as long as it resonates or you don't step out of line with the big dogs. And they still operating based off of a system that was established in the late 1800s. What? Seriously? So y'all have these aldermen, 50 of them, that's like mob bosses. And they can literally determine what's happening within their segment of the city without any oversight or anything that anybody can do that can determine or tell them whether they can or can't within that city. So here's my question then, right? If that be the case, how much are the aldermen participating in what's going on as far as these tent cities and the migrant crisis? And are they in bed with the mayor as far as determining what is happening and what kind of budget is being allocated towards it? If it has to happen inside of your district or your zone, are you then becoming culpable or responsible for what is happening as far as the migrant crisis also? And they just trying to divert it over in order to get it over into Brandon Johnson's lap. Are they also in bed with them? And then as you see the segregation in the majority of black people, because they all like to congregate together, they don't like to get out and do all of that other type of stuff, right? And so if they all are on the south side, who do you hold accountable for the plight of black people over in Chicago? Oh.
You see that with such conviction.
No, I mean,
it's never left the feudal age.
It's bizarre. So now what they'll tell you, the alderman will tell you that this is a great system because I as an alderman get to be hands-on. If Topolobampo needs help, I can come right on down, I can write something up, and I can get it taken care of. Well, that's true if you're in the good graces with your alderman. Or, as the history suggests in Chicago, if you've paid off, if you've participated in a racketeering scheme, if you've delivered your dues, then you're going to be taken care of.
So the mob exists here in a different way, a more benevolent way, let's say.
Right. Well,
Chicago, you dirty dogs. So if you grease enough palms and you make sure you contribute to them running for alderman and I guess getting elected as a result of it, then you're going to be in the good graces and they're going to make sure that you're taken care of. And you got the eye of the mayor, of your alderman and the mayor, and making sure that you can get certain things done. If they had that type of power without any kind of oversight, you know what you can do? You know what you can accomplish as a result of that? Wow. Chicago. I didn't even get into the middle of the video. I'm not even going to go into it because we got other things that we need to get to. But Chicago. Really? Is this a system? Why y'all ain't tell me that this is what y'all was dealing with over in Chicago? We would have brought them to the front of the congregation a long time ago. Wow. I didn't know that Chicago was this corrupt. Here's my question. Especially for all of you people that feel like Anton is too hard on Chicago. Am I too hard on Chicago, or are you not hard enough on the system that you're subjecting yourself to just because you was born and raised there? Because everybody that's held me accountable for Chicago ain't even living in Chicago no more. Ain't that crazy?